Let's talk about Illustrator's type tool. So right over here in the tools panel, if I click on the T or the little triangle right below the T, you're going to see we have three variations of the type. Let's just start with the first one, just the regular standard type tool. With this tool, you can just simply click and it will put a placeholder of lorem ipsum text in there for you. I'll bring the properties panel over here so we can just take a look at it. And in the properties panel, you can change the point size, and you can change the font. Click on the three buttons here. You're going to find more options. So in addition to point size, and this would be the leading, so this is the space between lines. This is tracking. So you can click here and let's say we open up the tracking, say there's 200. This is kerning. So kerning is just between two characters. So if you click and put your cursor between two characters, then kerning becomes active and you can modify it. Now with both kerning and with tracking, you can use the Option key and your left and right arrows. So Option, left arrow, right arrow. If I select the whole thing, this is tracking. So tracking is more global. It's for multiple characters. Kerning is just between two characters. Now we're going to see a little bit later how you can use this same tool to put type inside a shape. The next thing I want to talk about is actually type on a path. You can put type on any kind of a path. So let's just start by taking our pen tool and I'll create a path. Command click off of that. Then I'll go in here and choose my type on a path tool and just click on the path and it puts in the placeholder text. So we can come in here, I'll go to like 60 points. Now I want you to notice if I go into the direct select arrow, the white arrow, you're going to clearly see these bars and then these squares. This square and this square, that's the import and the output. And these beams, this is the beginning of the line of text, and this would be the end. And you can pull that down and it will hide part of the text. Now, why are these imports and outputs important? Well, I'm just going to add some more text in here so that it's overset, that I have more type in there than can appear on this line. When I'm in the type tool, if I hold down the command key, I will get the direct select arrow, and I want to click on this little box, the output. Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of. Let me zoom in, maybe it'll help a little bit. There. So you see now it looks like that my cursor has a little paragraph attached to it. That means it's ready to thread this type. So if I go down to another path and click, then it will thread the type to the next path. So what that means is if I were to edit this line of type, it's automatically going to update onto the next path. So this isn't something you're going to use right away, probably in your logos, but this will be something you may use later on when we get into doing a magazine spread. But in any case, I think it's a really good feature to know about. And it could be straight lines, obviously, any kind of paths you can thread this to. Okay, so a circle. I want you guys to take the ellipse tool and create a circle. Now I want to put type around the circle. We looked a little bit last week at doing type inside a shape. So with that one, you can just use your regular type tool and click, and it will fill in the space, whatever shape you've got. I'm going to make this a little smaller. I'm holding Command Shift and the less than arrow to make this a little smaller. You need to put type inside a shape like this, inside a shape if you want to justify it. Justified would be in the characters panel under paragraph here. Actually, it's in the paragraphs panel. And you'd click here and that would justify it. Same thing, obviously, if you want to just put it inside a rectangle, same thing applies. I'm going to go back a little bit here. Now I'm going to take the type on a path tool and click on the outside of the circle, and it puts the type all around the circle. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my direct select tool, and again, you're going to see the import and the outport. Now, what if I wanted this type to be inside the circle instead of outside the circle? You're going to see a lot of times on seals, like the seal of California I was looking at recently, and it says, going around the circle, it says, the Great Seal of, and then California is right reading. It's not upside down, as this text is here. So sometimes you need to be able to put type inside the circle. The way you do that is you go directly across. Here's our import and our outports right here, and then the I-beams that are associated with those. If you go directly across, you're going to see another beam. Let me zoom back, get back a little bit. This one here, directly across here, click on that one and drag it in, then it goes inside the circle. Okay, now let's talk about creating outlines. This is something you probably will want to do when you're working on your logo. So I've created a couple here like this. I want to show you how we would put these together. So I'm just going to create a new document. I'm using tabloid horizontal. And let's start by just typing the word art. And I will use just the regular type tool. And I'm going to do this in lowercase because I want to show you something. Do it in lowercase. I'm going into my characters panel over in the properties panel and increase it here to 72. Get rid of some of this stuff. Okay. So when you're designing, you may want to do everything in lowercase first, because you can then, by clicking on the three dots, open up the characters panel, and down here at the bottom of the characters panel, there's two T's. This is similar to Photoshop. Here you can make it one or all uppercase, like that. If I wanted them all uppercase, I just select the whole thing and type it. Now I want to change my font here, so I'm going to go to Arial Black, I think. Okay. I can scale this up just by holding. Now in Illustrator, you still have to use the Shift key to constrain proportion. So I'm holding Option Shift and scaling it up by clicking on one of the corners. Remember, the latest version of Photoshop, you don't use the Shift key. So this part gets a little bit confusing. All other programs, at this point, we still use the Shift key to constrain proportions. All right, so a lot of times when you're working with typography and you want to create something like a logo, you want to do outlines so that you can modify the type. So I'm going to go up to Type, Create Outlines. This now makes them into vector shapes. So well, first of all, I want you to be very aware of kerning in particular. So I've already outlined these. So if I want to move this T over, a couple of things I could do. I could take the direct select arrow and click in the middle of the T, and that'll select the whole object. And then I can use my left arrow, say, to move it over. Hold the Shift key, click in the middle of the R field somewhere, and then I can move that one over. Otherwise, if you use the selection tool, which selects everything, you're going to need to ungroup this first. So Object, Ungroup, or Command Shift G. Deselect it, and now you can modify these letters individually using the selection tool. With the direct selection tool, you could click on any point and modify that point, or you can click on a segment. So let's say I drag this one, hold down the Shift key to keep it straight. I'll drag this one all the way across like that. And then this one, I'll click in the middle. I'm still in the direct select, and just move it over so that it gets an overlap. Something like that. So this is often what we want to do with logos, is we want to present them in a way that's a little bit unusual. So we've modified it, in this case, the spacing between the letters, and we've dragged the top of the T over. It does cut off part of the R, but that sort of, sort of makes it look cool and designy, I think. So this starts feeling more like a logo. Logos are kind of like puzzles where everything has to sort of fit together and be fairly tight and integrated. Okay, let's look at the other one here. Let's see, if I just wanted to do, say, the word type, it'll use whatever your last settings were. So in here, it's still got my all caps selected. So I'm going to unselect that. Notice this, I couldn't do type create outlines. It's not available when the type is highlighted like this. So I need to use one of my selection tools and just have it selected but not highlighted, and then I can control, then I can create the outlines like this. Okay, and then with the direct select arrow, again, you could go into any segment, such as this segment here, and I'll just hold the shift key and just pull that down. And again, I want you to be very careful about kerning, so I'm going to tighten this one up by clicking in the middle, and then shift clicking this one and moving them over so that I get it much tighter. Usually in logos, we want to have it very tight, the kerning. When you're designing other things, like the names, for example, on your movie posters, having the tracking or the kerning very open often looks really nice. But with logos, often because we want a symbol-like look, the kerning is often really tight, maybe even tighter. Has to be legible. Maybe I'll pull that one down like that. So designing type, I think, in Illustrator is a lot more fun than working in Photoshop. It just seems to give you more options. Now notice if I'm using my up or down arrows, if you're out, in other words, you're zoomed out, it's going to move in rather large increments. And I can't get it to line up perfectly, say, with the top of that Y. But if I zoom in and then select it and use my arrows, well, at least you can, it's still moving pretty fast, but you can hold down the shift key and you can get it very close. Usually if you get in close, really close, you can get much more accurate. It doesn't jump around as much. Still having trouble lining it up perfectly. That's why sometimes if I'm trying to do something like this, where it's going to overlap another one, if I can't get it lined up exactly, then I will make it go the entire width by just dragging it across. I'm going into outline mode, Command Y, so I can grab onto this segment here and then pull it all the way across, like that. And I want to work more with the appearance panel. The appearance panel by default is now tucked in with the properties panel. It's not showing up right now because I don't have any objects selected. It shows up when we have objects. Let's take the type tool, just regular type tool, and create, I just want you to type a capital J, and let's change the font to Snell Roundhand, bold. So I want to come in here. I want it to be J, but I want to change it in here. Roundhand, bold, or black, either one. I'll just go with bold. And I want it to be 72 if it's not already. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it a little better. Okay. Now the appearance panel is showing here in the properties panel. So what I want you to do is click on the little circles, and that opens up the appearance panel. Now down here, we have the option to add additional fill or strokes. So I'm going to add a new fill. And from the drop-down menu here, the color swatch, I'm going to choose kind of a golden color. You do have to be careful with typography because it gives you an option to modify the type or the character. We want to just stay in the type mode, not the character. This gets really confusing. If you double click this and we go into character, things don't work the way you would expect them to. So in type, I'm adding the fill. Now to this fill, with this fill selected, and I did put a handout on this on .ed just a little while ago, so you can reference it online. I mean, you can download that and have some notes. I'm trying to find my printout of my notes here. Okay, so we've added a new fill, and now we're going to add an effect to the fill. So you have to make sure that that particular fill is highlighted. Make sure your letter is highlighted and that fill is highlighted. And then under effect, I'm going to go down to stylize and add an inner glow. So the inner glow, I did this earlier, so it's set up right. This, I went to a dark color that harmonizes or is compatible with my gold color. I've changed it to multiply because I want to go dark. Opacity is 75, blurs 2, and it's going from the edge rather than from the center. So we get this right away, we get this sort of illusion of dimensionality. It looks a little bit 3D. Okay, we're going to add another fill, and this one we're going to make white. This will be to create the illusion of a highlight. So now right away, it fills the whole thing so you can't see it. So what we're going to do is use an effect to basically shrink the path or pull the path in. It's under an effect, and it's called path offset. Now, if you go, we're going to play around with this in a minute on different settings. We want to go to a negative setting because we want to pull it in. And so this, whatever you use in here is going to be determined by the size of your type. Since I've only got 72 point here, I have found that minus 2.0 works pretty well. And you see that creates the illusion of a highlight. On the handout I gave you, I said minus 0.08. That's because I was using a much larger point size. I think I was using 140 or something. So if it can't do it, it won't do anything. So you might have to try a few things, like a few different numbers to get the effect you want. Sometimes you have to try quite a few because it'll just sit there and doesn't look like it's doing anything. But I found, anyway, with 72 points, this works pretty good. With 140, the minus 0.08 seems to work. I want to blur this because I want to soften this to create a highlight effect. So again, sometimes this will be deselected. You might have to make sure that it's still selected and that you have the white fill selected. Then go up to effect. Was there a question? No? Okay. And then I'm going to do Gaussian blur. And right now I've got it set at about 2.6, which seems to be pretty good. All right, now we want to add a drop shadow. So for the drop shadow, I'm going to go down to my first fill, and then under effect, stylize drop shadow. And in this case, my drop shadow is on multiply. I've set it to an opacity of 46%. My offsets are 5 point and a blur of 2. That works pretty well. Now, one cool thing about this is that this is still vector type. We didn't outline it, so it's still really type. So you could just add on to it. I can just click in here with my type tool, make sure that it's selected, and then type, say, jewelry. And it will just automatically apply all of these effects to the rest of the typography. So the appearance panel is extremely valuable, and it's great for a lot of different situations. We're going to be looking at quite a few different situations. So it's one that you want to become very familiar with. All right, let's just try one on your own. I'm going to delete this, take a letter or a number. I'm going to take the number 2, and let's apply some different effects. So I'm going to make sure it's just selected, add a new fill, change the color to red. Now I'm going to add a new stroke. I don't like this red. Okay, so I'm going to add a stroke down here. Now this stroke is right on the edge, but I want to offset it. Let's say I want it to come out. I'm going to bring this up, scale this up a bit. Now that proportionally made my stroke smaller. That's one reason I wanted to do it. but you could change the stroke width right in here. I'm going to use the path offset to move it out. You see how that's kind of cool, right? I think it's makes some, I'm going to lower it down a little bit. And if you hit the tab key, you can see the results. So I'm just making this smaller there. I think that's working pretty well. So I'll say okay to that. Let's add another fill just for the heck of it. So down here, I think I'll leave that fill on top, but make the fill below it a different color and then expand it using path offset. And again, I can play around with this and you can hit the tab key. As long as preview is on, you can hit the tab and it will update, show you what you've got. And if you can change the stacking order and you see what happens over here. So this is very much like a layers panel. I'm going to add a new stroke. I'll make this one something just so you can see it. And then again, offset it. So I'm just playing around. So you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing by any means. Just try for yourself and see what you can get. I'm going to leave this out here like this, but I'm going to increase the weight, something like that. Now, where this is going to become really useful, I think, is on your next assignment. So I just changed this to a T. On the next assignment, you're going to be creating a storybook illustration and typography to go with it. One of the things that we often use in a situation like that is something called a drop cap. So a drop cap means that the initial cap on the first paragraph is much larger than everything else and often very decorative. You can see it in, I'm going to bring up illuminated manuscripts. In illuminated manuscripts, they're famous for having really, really elaborate drop caps. So let me move around a little bit. Well, this is a giant one. Here's one over here. Let me zoom out a little. This one down here, all of these, this is a B, so they're extremely elaborate illustrations. So we won't be doing anything that elaborate. Here's one. And the drop cap in this case can be like on top of the paragraph. It's not, usually it sits down into the paragraph and then the paragraph wraps around it, moves out of the way, but it could also be right on top of it like this. Here's a giant one here, a giant L. So you can be very creative with drop caps and they add a very interesting element to your page. I want you to start being aware of drop caps when you're looking at magazine articles, and you'll see it a lot in magazines, even online on websites. Sometimes you'll see drop caps. So I'll change this font too, so we can just change the font. Let's say I go back to Arial Black, and it automatically applies all of the same features. Let's put a pattern inside. I think a pattern would be kind of cool. So I'm going to go up to my top fill and add a new fill, but this time I want to do a pattern. I've got one pattern in here, but there's a lot more patterns. If you go here where the books are, you can come down to patterns, and here we have basic graphics, we have decorative, and we have nature. I'm going to put in some animal skin. And what Illustrator does is it opens up the panel that has all of the collection in it. You'd select from this panel, and then it gets added to your swatches. So now it's in here to the swatches. They don't automatically all get added to the swatches because it would often make your swatch library just really, really huge. So the tendency or the default is for it just to add ones that you select. Okay. Under fill, we could modify the opacity. Now here's something I want to show you. In opacity, if you click, when you see an underline over here, that's like the 3 dots. If you click on the underline, it opens up, in this case, the opacity panel. So we can modify opacity here, but also here is where you can change the blend mode. So like multiply, color dodge, so forth. So this is where blend mode's hiding. Remember in Photoshop, it was at the top of the layers panel. Here it's inside the opacity panel. Let's see, what else I want to tell you about this. So you can just add as many as you want. You can also create your own patterns, and we will take a look at that in a little bit. Okay, so let's say I wanted to just change this pattern scale. This is where you do it. Right now, it's got the default. This is the way the pattern was created. Let's say I want it to be much smaller. I would go up to Object, Transform, Scale, and then I would uncheck Transform Object and just leave Transform Patterns. I do want it to be uniform. I'll change this, say, to 60. And then click Preview, and you see what happens over here. I'll say OK. I'll change this to not beyond multiply so you can see it. So this might be fun for you guys to play around with some of these features for your color version of your logo. We could also add, let's say if we go in here under fills, you can also add gradients. And we're going to be talking about gradients in a little bit here. I'll leave that the way it was. Okay. Inner glow is, let me show you an inner glow. Let me get rid of this one. You can just use the eyeball, obviously, to turn them on and off. So let's say I put an inner glow on this fill layer. This one has to be selected, and then it's under Effects, Stylize, and Inner glow. And I'm going to expand that so you can see it. So you can add as many effects as you want, as many layers and strokes. I don't think there's any limit. The trick is when adding effects is just make sure you have the correct fill or stroke selected that you want to add it to. Strokes, by the way, in Illustrator can also be gradients. So like that one, and we have a ton of gradients available.